Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. I have just finished the second season of Andor. No spoilers, but if you are entertained by squabbling factions, dangerous politics, and only ever hear rumors of a design, then it's good that you're working in Appsec. But you should also watch Andor. Which means this week we catch up on the news and share 2 interviews recorded by our Security Weekly friends at last month's RSAC conference. Make some plans and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Think your terminal emulation is secure? Think again. Passwords and firewalls alone won't protect you. Cyber threats are evolving, and so should your security. Rocket Secure Host Access gives you phishing-resistant, password-free protection with leading-edge encryption. Your mission-critical systems deserve more than good enough. Secure your green screen access and stay ahead of the threat. Rocket Secure Host Access. The future of TE is now. Learn more at securityweekly.com/rocketsoftware. This is episode 331, recorded May 19th, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with a very special new host, definitely new to ASW, Jeff Mann. Hello, Jeff. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Mike. Glad to join up today. We were talking before we started recording. I'm pretty sure this is my first time co-hosting Application Security Weekly. So long-time listener, follower, first time co-host.
It's your perfect opportunity to go from a listener to I have more of a comment than a question, because we have news today and we'll have lots of comments for it. But before we do that, do have a quick announcement about Identiverse 2025, which is returning to Las Vegas this June 3rd through 6th. You can hear from over 250 expert speakers, connect with over 3,000 identity security professionals across 4 days, covering the latest identity security trends. And here comes my favorite part. You can take part in hands-on workshops and explore the brand new, we're going to have to get a drum roll or something for this, non-human identity pavilion. Yes, thank you, Jeff. You're going to fit in great. Because of that, Jeff, you can register now and save 25% with IDV25-Security Weekly at securityweekly.com/IDV2025. Okay, long breath. There's been news, and we have something cryptocurrency adjacent, which honestly we don't often cover too much, because cryptocurrency thefts, smart contracts, they do tend to just be a self-funding bug bounty, and they're kind of dime a dozen. But Coinbase was hacked, and Coinbase is public. It's up on the, I think even on the S&P 500 now. And it came from a very specific angle that maybe at first doesn't seem Appsec, because there were the attackers, the criminals, bribed some of the customer support people. So this is a very human type of threat, a very insider threat, but it does have some Appsec angles that I want to get to in a second. But Jeff, when you see something like attackers demanding $20 million in ransom, or here is, we can look at some other cryptocurrency areas and they lost 10 million, 100 million in digital dollars. Maybe they're real. That, what comes to your mind just in terms of maybe what went wrong or what should have gone better?
I guess the first thing that strikes out to me is interesting is that, very often you hear about insider threats, and then you start going into conversations about clicking in links and falling for a phishing or a vishing attack, which to me isn't really an insider threat. That's more of an attack, and it's just targeting users. This one sounds like it actually was a good old-fashioned, let's bribe the cleaning lady or whoever it was to stick a USB stick into a desktop or something like that. It's true. You don't usually think about that type of an attack when you're thinking about many aspects of security, in particular Appsec, unless, of course, somebody's attacking the code base. But heck, that's all out in the quote unquote open these days in the cloud, like at GitHub repositories and things like that. I don't know anybody that still maintains their code base internally. I suppose there's some out there, but that's my thoughts.
Yeah, and part of that too is I know what you mean about, and I set that up too. It doesn't feel almost at the outset that there is this AppSec angle because, hey, you bribed a human, and humans are going to bypass things. But you did mention, for example, phishing, and I can't torture myself with listing off all the other alternatives to phishing. I won't torture you either. But those have, like as you said, like if somebody clicks on a link, if that is already dangerous just because they click on a link and your security fails, you failed the user in the sense of not offering strong designs around multi-factor authentication, strong authentication of some sort, or isolating systems, or just having systems that are saying, this is a developer laptop or this is a customer service laptop. They should have least privilege, these common things that are probably how many decades old. So I want to say there's got to be a way of designing systems that are at least resilient to insider threats. And maybe you can't prevent an attacker from, doing their job, that insider, but you can at least have observability or certain things like that to me do start to be, we should have designed this better. We needed to notice this better.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it ties into one of my big, my big beliefs in what are the big problems that plague us all collectively to this day. One of which is, I believe most people in organizations think that security is somebody else's problem. Either we've outsourced it to third parties or it's the security practice or something along those lines. It's always somebody else's problem. But the second one, I think, ties more closely to this. It's as a user and an employee in a company, if I'm able to use something, I kind of believe that it's secure. And I don't have to think about how I'm using it because surely somebody's protecting me and wouldn't let me do something that I shouldn't be doing with whatever it is I'm allowed to use. I think this falls kind of squarely into that bucket.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And this is where I'm going to have to, we're in the year 2025, so AI, LLMs do have to be mentioned. We have to hit our quota. And there's a big thing of how is AI going to transform or do something else, a big hype-related word to security. And I don't know if AI is actually becoming a new type of insider threat because, as you say, what is, this is humans are maybe an insider threat. Can AI be an insider threat in this category in any way, or is this just a different type of code that we have to worry about?
I think once you get past the hype cycle, it's another set of code that you need to worry about. It's another application. It's another capability. AI speeds things up, and it's funny that you just said we're in the year 2025 because I'm like, I love that song. I mean, I've known that song since it was published in 1965, I think. I had a lot of older brothers with a lot of 45s. Google what a 45 is. But yeah, I see a lot of vendors and a lot of practitioners using a lot of the terminology around AI basically to sell something. It's either a form of FUD or it's just the hype cycle or it's the, having just been out at RSAC conference a couple weeks ago where everybody was talking about AI and LLMs.
Everybody.
In fact, I think one of our interviews that we're going to be airing, I think I did one of them. I recognize one of the people. But what I liked about RSAC this year is people were talking beyond the FUD and the hype cycle, and we're actually getting down to this is what it's actually doing for us. This is what it's capable of doing. This is its limitations. So in that sense, I'd still fall back on it's another capability. It's another application. It's something else to worry about. Absolutely. I just balk at the idea of calling something an insider threat where you just happen to be targeting users and call that an insider threat, because it didn't start on the inside; it started on the outside. But we probably lost that battle in terms of defining terminology. So we should probably move on from that.
If we already have more than one term for phishing, I think we've lost a lot of battles in terms of terminology.
Fair enough.
But I'm going to jump to actually a different article that I grabbed, because since you're talking about that idea of, who's the threat, is this a threat, and a little bit of taxonomy, the Open Source Security Foundation, so our friends over at OpenSSF, and the Linux Foundation put together a cybersecurity skills framework. And this is a list of roles and responsibility that they identified for what they just over a dozen cybersecurity related job families. And these families are essentially web developers, software developers, platform engineers. I won't read the whole list. AI engineer shows up on that list. But then you also get into some things like solutions architecture, cybersecurity operations. That's more of just that pure play. Maybe that's the Appsec. But there's even GRC in there too, and compliance. So part of this is, it's yet another list, and I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of lists, but it does at least look like it's helpful for organizing who's working on what. And I don't know if we need to organize it to the specifics of web versus software versus DevOps versus platform, but it does seem helpful to say, hey, you should be worried about the OAuth top 10 or SQL injection, cross-site scripting that they call out there. But when there's a couple other things that stood out to me. But when you see a list like this, does this seem useful to you, or does this seem like, is this the audience for more Appsec people to understand how Appsec should be applied to enterprises, or is this more of enterprises trying to figure out what should we be doing with security, or how would you use this? Maybe as a more easy, as broader question.
Well, just to dovetail over onto what I was saying earlier about what I see as sort of the major problems in organizations in terms of security. The idea that security is somebody else's problem. I think this type of list begins to capture. Look up your current role and see that it fits into what they're calling a family of categories of job titles. And if you're falling somewhere in one of these categories, guess what? Security is part of your job at some level, in some way, shape, or form. And then on the flip side, what I was saying about how anything you're allowed to use internally should be secure. You have that expectation. The people have that expectation. Again, it goes back to looking at what role you're in and what might be a documented expectation of what you should be doing above and beyond simply using the tools that you're allowed to use. So I think there is some utility to this, if nothing else, is sort of a PR campaign to try to promulgate the idea, 30, 40, I'm in my fifth decade, going back to 2025. I'm not in my fifth decade of life, but I'm in my fifth decade of doing information security, and anything that can help to explain to people that security is more than just a this or that or another thing. It's a comprehensive kind of takes the whole village, takes the whole organization to be secure. I find this helpful. But I also noticed some pretty glaring omissions. Further up in the thing, they sort of categorize, and I'm not sure what they were calling them. They've got like 5, I think, major groupings, like security best practices, and they reference different guidelines and frameworks like the OWASP top 10. You mentioned that, ISO 27001. Okay. Those of you that might watch the main show, Paul's Security Weekly, know that I bring up PCI a lot. PCI is not mentioned here as a security best practice. Neither when it comes to the next category, compliance and regulations, knowledge of relevant regulations. They mentioned GDPR and HIPAA. I would argue those are some of the least impactful regulations out there when it comes to security. Very, very focused, which is something that PCI gets accused of at times. But from a framework perspective, PCI, 20 years into it, still covers all the major bases of how you should implement a security program in your organization. It would, going back to the categories of job descriptions, they could certainly be mapped to various sections of the PCI standard. It too is separated into categories, 6 in particular, but it covers the broad spectrum of what you should do to build and maintain a security organization, information or data security program in your organization. Where it usually goes off the rails for people is they think, oh, but it just pertains to credit cards. I'm like, well, no, any kind of sensitive data you have, you could apply all these rules and you'd be doing fairly well. And that's where the rails come off. So, I'm a grumpy old man and I find everything is lacking, and I'm somewhat cynical, but, I also am getting a little soft in my old age, perhaps, where any little bit helps. So if this thing is organized and laid out in a way that somebody, especially a younger person that doesn't think that like I do, doesn't have the wire, the brain isn't wired the same way that mine was decades ago, this might appeal and trigger something. So I'm all for it.
And there's an aspect here too that I think is a little bit different from something like PCI, which, my understanding PCI does have a lot of, here's some, call it strategies and tactics. Like here's something to do to protect the environment, that cardholder data. And this list calls out some things around automating security around CI/CD, automating a lot of practices, which I'm a big fan of. I think that's wonderful. Interestingly, it also mixes in with those practices some aspects of, you should be a basic skill required for web developer is understanding the differences between symmetric and asymmetric encryption. And I think that's good, as not in the sense of you need to be implementing it or you need to be able to say exactly what the DES S boxes look like or something like that, but it's just more of, if you threat model something around performance or why key exchanges are happen, or that handoff of like an SSL handshake that goes from asymmetric to symmetric. Those are just good background knowledge to know. So I like that in here. And one other thing that stood out to me that was under the basic skills for cybersecurity operations, it called out, and I'll just mostly quote, written and oral communication skills, essential for documenting incidents, reporting to team leaders, etc. But I thought that those actually, those written and oral communication skills still apply to pretty much any of those categories on the development side, in the sense of, can you explain your design? Can you talk about the architecture? Can you talk about the choices you made in designing this software? Because that is where threat modeling comes from. That's where more consequential decisions come, as well as things like, are we creating our own tech debt? Do we know that in 6 months from now or 6 years from now, which is it that this decision is going to haunt us? So that's one of those areas. Maybe I'm looking at this and wishing there was more from my perspective.
Well, I'm pretty sure from the dawn of internet time, no developer or coder has ever wanted to document their code. No. I don't think that's ever changed.
Guilty as charged. Yeah.
So, the idea of, and when I think of communication, I think mostly in terms of oral communications, but written communications are an important thing. We collectively lack, on both types, or all types of communication. So I definitely agree with that. But it's interesting that you're sort of focused on application security, and you think that communication is an important skill, and maybe it's more the written communication. It's certainly an overarching problem with our industry, and what I try to do, I've been a consultant advisor for almost 30 years, and my job has been primarily to go into companies where security is not their primary function, their core value or core mission. Especially in the PCI world, they're coming kicking and screaming to have to do any level of security, because they like selling stuff, and they like accepting credit cards, and I've always seen that as a good opportunity to go in and try to explain to them, and my goal has always been trying to explain to them why security matters, why they should care about it, and try to explain it in a way that makes sense to whoever the audience is. And when I say audience, it's the customer, it's the client, it's the GRC group, internal audit, the security team, the devs. As a PCI assessor, I have to talk to all these different types of groups, and I've had various levels of experience that sort of cover the gamut through the years for all of those groups, between the openly hostile to the cowering in fear. My management's told me only to answer yes and no, and they're watching me, and I don't want to say the wrong thing and expose things that we don't want to have exposed. And I've had to learn to navigate that, and with the goal of being, you need to tell me what's wrong so we can fix it, so that you can be secure and then be found compliant. And I don't always win at that, but I've had some successes over the ways. But a lot of it has to do with being able to communicate in a way that helps the client, in this case, understand in a way that it clicks for them. Oh, yeah, this is something I should care about. This does make sense. I could spend hours trying to explain how to do that, but we'll just leave it at that. But I think that's a worthy goal for all of us at whatever level of involvement we are, and whether, if we're doing Appsec, hopefully we already care about the security, and so that's a given. But that's not always assumed. I think
it's not always assumed.
It works both ways.
Yeah, and I love how you framed that, because it's a real helpful way to bring in two other articles I had, one from NCSC and one from Secure Code Warrior, both about secure design. Right. The NCSC one, though, it was a section from their cross-cutting problems list out of their basically they have a research problem book on the web that's really just what are unsolved or difficult to solve problems within cybersecurity. And this one was
default passwords for the win.
For the win, exactly. Just start there.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But this one, so you're going. I'm going to turn it right back over to you, because the title of this one is "How do we incentivize secure by design technology?" And you kind of when you're talking about PCI. Some people are possibly dragging and kicking and screaming because they have to do it, because PCI said so. Not the best of incentives, but what you were describing too is not just we have to do this, but how can we best address this? And I think that's the important subtext. And this is, this article, this blog post really is just asking questions. And, one of the questions that stood out for me, does secure by design scale for everyone, or are there hidden costs for certain organizations or projects? And I'm wondering, is this incentivization also what you're encountering in PCI, or does that external force of PCI just say, oh, we've got to do this? It makes it easier to kick off that conversation.
It's a great question, and I don't have necessarily an answer for you that people will like. But in my 5 decades in the business and almost 30 years of talking to mostly commercial private sector companies about doing this thing that we call security, cybersecurity, information security, I don't know of any better, more effective incentive than what I will loosely call regulatory requirement, especially when it comes to application development, secure application development, Appsec, because most developers that I've talked to over the years and have known or know of, they're incentivized by, make this thing work 30 minutes ago, or you're fired, or you lose your bonus, or you start getting, percentage points knocked off your bonus. That's a very strong incentive. And the incentives that need to come for application security in particular necessarily are not going to come from within. I don't think they're going to come from a higher source, whether it's somebody up the management chain, the executive suite. But I hate to say it, but I don't know anything else that incentivizes more than regulatory compliance. The only other thing that incentivizes that I've seen is you suffer a breach, and for some amount of time, at least the executive C-suite gets religion and knows that they have to do stuff because they want to get the regulators that are fining them and the insurance adjusters that may or may not accept the claim that they filed. That's, in my experience, that's been the one of two things that makes people change in a fundamentally sustainable or repeatable way. Plenty of efforts have gone out there to, like, and PCI has a reputation of, well, it's just a point in time assessment, or it's a checkbox assessment. So people do what they have to do in order to get through that period. I mean, I've had clients that have been failing vulnerability scans, and so they just simply turn a server off for the scanning period, pass a scan, turn it back on. When I get wind of that, I don't accept that, but that kind of stuff does happen, and I'm sure there's equivalencies, in the Appsec world, but that's kind of missing the point. But you can monetize it. This is all a money equation, at some point anyway. But it's how much do you want to spend to secure code that may or may not be used in a breach that will cost you revenue, consumer confidence, fines, regulatory oversight, and so on and so forth. It's all a big gambit, but most people would understand that a certain amount of investment in prevention is better than not in terms of trying to minimize the costs of a breach that come down the road later on. But how do you do that consistently? I don't know any other way other than regulation.
And there's even Microsoft, for example. They was it last year, I believe, their Secure Futures initiative. They, Satya Nadella said we're going to actually start to tie for some incentives, bonuses to secure by design work or security to senior leadership, and that ties into it doesn't want to drive those perverse incentives like we'll turn this off while we scan. Always that's going to come from anything.
Right.
But I think one of the other things that stood out to me was in this article also does call out liability as a peer to incentives. And the CISA Secure by Design documents talk about this too, taking ownership of security outcomes for the user. And this is where hopefully, I do hope that at least as like a cybersecurity skills framework and people see their roles as lobbying to fight for the user, to call back to Tron, one of my favorite movies, rather than just say, we're going to write that we take security seriously blog post, pay for a year's worth of, monitoring for people, right, and move on. That's the wrong kind of liability that we were looking for here.
Yeah, the movie quote that comes to mind for me, and I can never remember the exact quote, but the old movie Cool Hand Luke, where there's a comment in there about positive or negative reinforcement coming from the overseer. That's what comes to mind. Again, people tend to respond when they get hit in the pocketbook, and so that is one way of doing it. And an example from PCI, there came a time where to try to defeat the people that were just doing the checkbox exercise but not really doing any of the security requirements, the council, PCI council, changed the reporting documentation to require the signature of an executive officer of the company and attach to it the potential for personal liability. That was a game changer. It didn't completely solve the problem, but it did get a whole lot of companies to wake up and say, oh, we actually have to do the things that this stuff says, not just say that we're doing it by checking a box, because it's my butt on the hook.
making it personal, and it's always disappointing that we have to go that specific and use that bit more of the cliche, a bit more of the stick, the carrot. But if it works, there's got to be some kind of transformation. I know, Jeff, we're going to have to let you go soon. I'm going to squeeze in just a quick reference to one last article.
Yeah, we do one last story. I can be
Perfect.
a few minutes late to
is
my next call.
Secure Code Warrior published a PDF about secure by design. And there were two things that stood out to me that I think is kind of maybe helps put a cap on the conversation we've had here, this theme. The first one was that, Jeff, you were talking about, just a few or more decades that you've been working within security, changes that you've seen or what you have seen. The Secure Code Warrior went out, talked to a lot of different companies, and probably this won't surprise you, but they found one common thread. No two definitions of what constitutes secure by design were the same. And I think that's still Appsec struggling to try to figure out what's going on here. And then another quote I want to pull out real quick is that they talk about 5 different elements to doing secure by design. And the first one involved threat modeling, design, and security architecture. But there's a comment they had, this process did not typically involve developers. And that was interesting to me. It was basically saying, there's a maturity model behind all of this, but it's a lot of Appsec teams doing this on their own. And then maybe, if I'll use 2 cliches for this episode, throw their results over the wall to the developers and say, go do this. And that does seem to set up the wrong incentives, the wrong relationship, the wrong way of just figuring out we could have done this better.
Well, I'm not a developer, and so I'm not coming to this question probably with the same bias that you have. But I almost want to say I understand the logic of it being, secure by design, meeting sort of specific goals and objectives at a high level, without the bias of, oh, I know how to do that. Oh, I know how to do that. Well, you can't really do it like that. It should be done like this, which starts to dilute perhaps the overarching goal or objective. To use PCI as an example, PCI is as a security standard has been around over 20 years, and it's got the same 6 overarching goals and the same 12 major requirements as it did back in 2004 when it was first published. And there's a lot of people that have complained over the years that it's behind in the times and it needs to be updated. Now, version 4 came along and there was a lot of updating to more modern vernacular, as it were, for networking and application development and things like that. But the goals and the objectives, to me, don't change, and they are somewhat independent of the technology that's being used. And so much technology these days is not hardware, it's software, and it's application development. So I kind of get the logic of it, and I would suggest maybe that because you're coming from the inside, you're a little bit touchy. It's like, well, hey, now I should have a say in this. But I think the logic is goals and objectives that are independent of whatever framework you're using, whatever your developer skills are, and so on and so forth, as limitations. Meet these objectives. Now we'll give it to you to figure it out. And I can understand why you'd be pissed off that you weren't invited to the table to provide input.
Well, and I think the one thing, we're going to have you back on to talk more about PCI at some point, because I think along these themes, both PCI and the Let's Encrypt project, I think, are more responsible for having TLS pervasive throughout the web than any type of naming and shaming, any amount of DEF CON or Black Hat presentations on beast and crime and silly stuff. So I'll very immediately acknowledge this, the incentives and the automation that came from those. So I'll say thank you to PCI, thank you to Let's Encrypt, and of course, I got to say thank you to Jeff Mann for joining us this week. Thank you so much, Jeff.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here. First time in the can.
First time in the can. And everyone should stick around for 2 short interviews recorded at last month's RSAC conference, because first up, we'll have Charlotte Wylie, the SVP and Deputy CISO at Okta, who will discuss the problem of identity sprawl, including human and, of course, my favorite, non-human identities. And if you want to hear some more from Jeff, he talks to Rami Saas, co-founder and CEO of Men.io, about securing more than just the code that AI generates. So once again, go check them out, listen to more Jeff. Remember to subscribe, check out the show notes, share on the socials. And speaking of code, check out My Enemy by Zarina, Antibody, and Binary Division. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.
Welcome to RSAC Conference 2025. We're here recording live from the CyberRisk TV studio and Broadcast Alley at Moscone West. I'm your host, Mandy Logan, and joining me for this interview is Charlotte Wylie, SVP and Deputy Chief Security Officer at Okta. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful seeing you again.
Nice to see you too. Yeah.
Has RSA's kicked off okay for you? I'm sorry, it's RSAC conference now.
Yes,
Make sure
RSAC. It has, yeah. It's always a really big event, and each year it gets bigger, which always amazes me. A lot of great conversations and great topics this year. So yeah, hopefully it's a great event for everyone.
I agree. And it's exciting because Okta is involved in so many parts of the RSAC experience.
Yeah.
So I hope that you're getting to enjoy many areas of fun and intrigue and connecting through all of it. And I'm curious now because Okta is so known and obviously focuses on identity security. And as identity keeps moving beyond just human identity, what are some of the risks or trends or information that you see and you feel is poignant at this moment?
It's so interesting to see the RSAC themes of 2025 compared to 2024. Last year we were talking about Gen AI in a sort of marketing sort of hype, and this year it's real. We're seeing it. It's in real applications now, and from a security standpoint, that means real threats, real risks that we're having to deal with. And so for us at Okta, it's an incredibly important part of our strategy about how do you secure that non-human identity as well as the human identity. More often than not, we're just not putting the right security in at the start for non-human identities, and so we really want to make sure that we're accommodating for that in our product. And so we've started really early on that journey. We've developed Auth for Gen AI, which is really about providing, secure product around how do you secure the controls for Gen AI and agents from the very beginning, from day one. So it's great to see the evolution.
Well, in that, with the Auth for Gen AI, what precipitated that you felt was one or two of the key challenges that came simply because of the Gen AI?
I think that what it's done with Gen AI is it's increased and elevated the already existing identity threats that we were seeing before.
Right.
So it's just that attackers are using more sophisticated social engineering mechanisms with Gen AI. So we're seeing very...
much more rapidly.
Much more rapidly.
Yes.
So things like really hyper-realistic phishing or deep fakes that are bypassing current verification mechanisms. And so it's really about we have to respond to that in the way that you're securing identity pre, during, and post authentication. And so we're looking at how do we provide a platform, a unified, secure, single pane of glass for not just your human identities, but your non-human identities as well.
And with that view, what do you feel like organizations should be focusing on? Where should they put their time in the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think that it's really think about sort of the proliferation of different identities and that scale. So where you've got identities from machines to employees, APIs, and now AI agents. And so that broadens the potential for many different gaps to exist in your identity platform. And so really you need to think about how am I going to unify the different solutions that I have for identity and ensure that the attackers aren't getting through those gaps because of weak policies or just visibility issues. How do we make sure that we're providing that end-to-end visibility for all identities in the ecosystem?
Wow. So, with your background on such a broad range of establishing and scaling, but also with processes, not only on the human side, with individuals within an organization, but also the processes that security teams and organizations need to go through. What can you share that is, are there steps or benchmarks of a process that you would recommend organizations follow while dealing with Gen AI augmentation to the existing threat landscape?
Absolutely. I think that knowing what identity threats exist within your existing environment is the starting point. And then, as I say, the non-human identities, just they elevate and scale that. And so I don't think we're dealing with net new identity threats and issues. It's just that we're dealing with them on a very different perspective, a very different plane. And so for organizations, it's know where your gaps are, know where your risks are around your identity and access management controls. Focus on making sure that you are securing both human and non-human accounts, and do it in a way that's unified, do it in a way that you minimize those gaps, and that you're tackling the end-to-end position of where those threats could eventuate.
Excellent. Now, have you noticed, I've seen some trends about really, say, old school attack vectors like SQL injection and stuff gaining a foothold again because of generative AI agents, or because of data, the way it's being used within the organization. Can you speak on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point you just made is these old vectors that we're seeing still being leveraged. It's they're not new challenges. It's just we're dealing with them in a very different way. And so with the non-human identities, it's really, you want to be looking at applying the same thinking for human identities against them. So how are you rotating the credentials for these AI agents?
Okay.
How are you making sure that you're validating or remediating any issues on a constant basis? And so treat them the same way you would as a human account. And I think that you will get the same outcome in terms of being able to identify those risks early and mitigate them where you can.
And what are you especially proud of that Okta is doing on that front for its customers?
I love this. So we really want to think about how do you bake security in, not bolt it on. So Auth for Gen AI is a great example of that, where from day one, you're ensuring that the identities are secure. You've got the right identity and access management controls in there. And so we're really thinking about the pre, during, and post-authentication journey, and how do you verify that you are doing the right things for those non-human accounts the same way that you would with your employee base. So.
And do you have any numbers or data on the non-human identities, the ratio that Okta or customers are currently dealing with?
It's interesting. I recently read the Gartner report, and they've suggested that by 2028, we're going to see around 25% of breaches having a compromised AI agent involved.
Oh.
Which I think is fascinating. And so really, I think that's just a watershed moment for the industry to be able to say, how do I protect myself against this happening? Because, that's 1 in 4 organizations going to experience that in their breaches, which is kind of terrifying.
It absolutely is. And that made me think of Pluralsight's recent report on AI skills. And among 1,200 practitioners, they found that 74% self-reported exaggerating their know-how and understanding of AI and AI agents.
Oh, wow. Not unsurprising.
It is not.
I think it's someone compared this the other day to like blockchain a few years ago, where it was the big hype and what are we doing about it, but the reality was that many people just didn't quite wrap their head around how this was going to affect us and what was going to happen. I think that we're in that age now, and there's so much potential, I think, for the vendors here, and I think Okta as well, for us to make sure that we are providing solutions for dealing with this new agentic age that we're living in. It's going to be interesting to see how that adoption and that understanding of that adoption plays out in the next few years.
It absolutely is. Charlotte, this has been lovely. I'm so glad that you are here, and thank you for sharing with us. And we definitely want to invite our audience to get more information. So to find out more about Okta, please visit securityweekly.com/Okta RSAC. For all RSAC 2025 coverage by Cyber Risk Alliance, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC. Thanks again, Charlotte.
And we're back at RSAC Conference 2025, broadcasting at the Cyber Risk TV booth, which is in Broadcast Alley at Moscone West. The place is crowded. This is the first full day. Things are opening up. The vendor floor is opening up. And we're really good at suppressing the background noise. So hopefully you're enjoying all of this live and without interruption. I am the co-host of Paul Security Weekly, Jeff Mann, and our chat this session is with Rami Saas. He is the CEO of a company called Men.io. Rami, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
How are you liking RSA so far? I'm sorry, RSAC.
All right, yeah.
Rebranding.
It's my 10th time.
Okay.
So it's pretty good. You know, I like it here. I like San Francisco. I like meeting all these people. That's like a special opportunity to get to meet in person.
Right. Do you guys have a booth in the
Oh, we do, yeah.
South Hall or North Hall?
South.
Okay. I will be over there this afternoon. I'll have to make sure I stop by.
Come say hi.
How did you get your start in cybersecurity?
Actually, right out of college, I was hired by the person who today is my partner and co-founder.
Oh, wow.
In his previous company as an engineer, software engineer, just fresh out of college. And that company was doing something called role management, which is like a niche of identity management.
Okay.
It was later acquired by CA. So
back in those days.
Yeah, almost by random chance, right? Just liked working with this person, Ron Ryman, who I still work with, and we're great friends. And that was the company. That what it was doing.
Okay. So what made you decide to go off and start your own company? What issues did you see that you wanted to solve or do better?
Yeah, that company, when it was acquired, had to produce a very detailed report of all the open source dependencies we were using, which we didn't have. So during the due diligence, the most stressful part was fully dedicated. The entire development team was just doing research online, trying to figure out the dependency of dependencies, and document them to produce the report.
Sounds a lot like an SBOM.
It is. That term didn't exist back then.
Right.
But yes, essentially it was an SBOM. And then just by blind luck, there were no major issues. And we presented the report and it was accepted and transaction happened. But it did seem like a big risk, not just for us, for any company doing application development and trying to do something with itself, whether it's raise money or get acquired or oftentimes even sell to a large enterprise that would do some scrutiny on you.
Sure.
And there was no decent way to do it. Everything was extremely manual, very laborious, very time consuming. Okay. So we said, okay, this looks like a big gap in the market. And we got back together again. So the founders of that company and myself came together and founded.
So how long ago did this happen?
This was 14 years ago.
14 years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to this. When was the term SBOM coined? Seems like only in the last 5 years or so?
Probably longer, maybe like 8-9 years,
8-9?
I think,
okay.
Give or take.
Well, there's that blur of COVID in the middle that
right, yeah.
screws up my clock anyway.
Right.
But it sounds like you were sort of an early purveyor of doing the SBOM, just getting your arms around all that stuff that you have in your code. That
right, yeah. So broader than just SBOM, this notion of software composition analysis didn't exist before us, right? So you could say we were the pioneers of SCA.
We can say that.
Yeah, okay. And then, to some extent we were ahead of our time, but in a bad way, right? We were doing it before anyone really cared.
Right.
And took us a few years before it got any traction.
No magic square for you.
No. We for 4 years we were toughing it out on ourselves, no funding, just hacking it until Heartbleed. Basically, if you remember that, back in 2015, started raising awareness. to this problem, and then shell shock, and then a whole host of other
There's a wave of
vulnerabilities.
them right in that time.
Yeah. And that turned the table for us, and then we really started creating a real business with customers with need, and were able to solve the need for them and provide real value and raise money and start growing the company and make it a real business.
Unfortunately, that tends to be a truth in our industry, if we call it that people don't really get it until something really bad happens. And then all of a sudden, hey, this is something that we should take seriously.
Right.
So fast forward 14 years, what does Mend have today? What are you offering?
So over the last several years, we've been expanding our offering all the time, and we currently provide a very comprehensive, complete application security platform that includes all aspects of the technology stack that people develop. So it includes the code itself, open source, containers, operating systems, and recently we've added AI components that go into, right, yeah.
We have to talk AI.
Yeah, we have to. It's mandatory.
That's right.
So increasingly over the past, let's say, year, we've seen more and more of our enterprise customers start to pull in AI components and bake them into the applications that they are developing.
Gotcha.
It's similar to the way open source is being used, but it's not identical.
Right.
And we noticed that existing security tools do not apply. Right, so if a developer is now grabbing a model or a RAG or an agent or something, a notebook, and putting that in their application, and you then scan that application with existing tools for SCA and SAST or any other tools, you're not going to get any results. So we started developing a new platform, a new service to identify security vulnerabilities in those open source components.
Gotcha.
And actually, going back to SBOM, what we very quickly found is that most of the time, enterprise organizations have zero visibility into what's going on in their applications. And so before doing any kind of security analysis, you actually need to SBOM your AI. In the AI space, it's usually referred to as shadow AI discovery.
Gotcha.
Right? So there's a lot of shadow AI.
Right.
Shadow in the sense that, if you're an enterprise organization and you have, let's say, 5,000 developers working for you, many of them will be randomly pulling AI components and putting them into the software. But if you are the headquarters, right, if you're the DevOps person, security, application security, compliance people, they don't know that's going on.
Right.
So very commonly, I had dozens of these conversations with our customers. I would go in, talk to the people that we talk to, the DevOps people, and ask them, okay, how many AI applications do you develop? And they would say 10, 15. And then we run a super basic shallow scan and find 200, 300.
Right.
And fine, granted, most of them are not like production level applications, and some of them are just sandbox applications that developers play around with, but still, there's no visibility.
Sure.
So the first priority is discovery, right? Shed light on all that shadow AI.
Right.
So that's like the first basic functionality of our new AI offering. And then analysis. Okay, you found all your AI SBOM. Analyze all these components. Try and figure out if they have any vulnerabilities or issues that you should be worried about.
Right.
And then finally, the third level is remediation, right? So, okay, we identify the components, we analyze them, we found some issues. Now let's help you fix them, right? Because many people, I'll let you in a little secret, they are not AI experts. Yeah, there's very little AI experts in the world, right? This is a very brand new kind of technology and topic, and it's only been around at scale for a year or two.
Right.
So many people wouldn't really know what to do with it, okay? So imagine
just even from last year RSA, where AI was the hot topic, but it was much more hypothetical.
Right.
What's going to happen in the future conversations? Whereas this year already, more companies are coming in with, no, we actually have a strategy, plan, implementation, use for AI, rather than just the sky is falling.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So best estimates we've seen and surveys we've run indicate that maybe 0.5%, maybe less of applications have AI in them,
Okay.
right? But
Wait a week.
commonly, these would be like the most innovative, the strategic applications of organizations and the things that they care very deeply about.
Right.
So it is happening, still like super early days, but it is becoming a real thing, and there are more and more AI applications going out to the world.
Out of curiosity, in my day job, I do assessment work. So I talk to a lot of different companies, a lot of different DevOps teams, developer teams. They've always been notorious for not following policy and rules and sort of being off somewhere, doing whatever they have to do to develop because they got deadlines and they got performance measurements. And usually, in my experience, they're the notorious defenders for downloading things and using things open source, back when open source was policy not to use it, to just whatever it takes for them to get their job done, which is obviously now extending into the shadow AI.
Right.
Is there a way to prevent from a policy, from a procedure perspective, to train developers in the right way of introducing AI into their projects, if for no other reason, so that it's known about? Or is that a hopeless pie in the sky ideal?
I think, systemically, maybe yes, and training and education and enablement is always good, right? I would never tell you not to educate people. Sure, let's do that and help developers have a better understanding on both the value of AI technology, but maybe the risks or things that they should be aware of and be mindful of when they choose which AI component to use and how to use it, definitely. But I don't think you can rely on that as an organization to protect you long-term.
I would agree with that, because the rules have been in place since the beginning on what not to download and the right way to do things.
Right.
And it
what we
doesn't
find
often work.
Sure. So what we find does work is this approach we call manage by exception.
Okay.
So from the developer point of view, they don't need to be concerned about anything unless something bad is happening.
Okay.
Right? So there's very often a tendency for security tools to flood you with alerts and tell you about all these things that most of them you have nothing to do about, right? If you're an individual developer, you don't need to know about all the vulnerabilities in the application that were got there by some other developer doing something, or some by malfunction, or some open source, or something that you were not involved with, you didn't make the decision for. So it works much better if we only tell you about the very specific cases that you are directly responsible for, and we do it in a timing that is convenient for you, right? It's not a context switch, and it's not in the middle of you trying to accomplish something else that's important to you, that creates value for your application, but rather in some kind of a process that's already in line with, doing a pull request, doing a commit, doing a push, doing some code review. That's the right time to surface security issues, one at a time, make it easy to consume and resolve.
Okay.
And have an orchestrated system sort of behind the scenes that's being managed by the security professionals to drive the right, prioritization and triage of, what vulnerabilities does the organization even care about, right? Because if you find 10,000 vulnerabilities, most of them are not that important, probably. So you need to find the right one. So we do a lot of...
So you're perhaps opening a can of worms here, and we don't have much time left, but how does Mend approach risk classification or severity?
Sure.
Do you contribute to that to help customers make that decision of what do you care about?
Yeah, very much. So in the past year, we've been rolling out our ASPM system, Against Security Posture Management, and we very early on have made a decision to allow our policies, prioritization policies, to be based on timed SLAs. Meaning you have a lot of different criteria to choose from to define the risk level of a specific vulnerability. So severity, exploitability, reachability, context, what the application is, etc., etc. And then tailor the policy to say, okay, if it's a high severity, reachable vulnerability in this repository, I need it taken care of within 72 hours.
Right.
If it's medium severity, it's not reachable, maybe 30 days. And then we have this cadence of, a daily check to see, okay, what needs to happen today,
Gotcha.
right? And then that helps you both prioritize and manage the risk reduction in an orderly manner that, helps you get real progress.
Which is huge because there's so many vulnerabilities out there today, and we talk about this on the show all the time, just the sheer amount of vulnerabilities, and they're going up, they're not going down, and just how hard it is for companies to deal with using the traditional methods, the traditional CVSS score, mediums and above, criticals, highs. We have to get them fixed this high, and it's elusive. So the idea of prioritization is absolutely pragmatic, but companies are still fumbling with how to do that effectively. Personally, I think they should figure it out, but obviously there needs to be a reliance on tools and experts to do it for them.
Right.
Which is what I'm hearing you bring to the table and offer them.
Right, yeah. We make it very easy for them to set up their policies and decide what's critical for them and what the timeline needs to be, then automate the rest of the workflow.
Great. Well, I appreciate your time today explaining the unique problem that you discovered ahead of the game and how you're solving it for customers today. That's going to wrap us for this time. This is Rami Saas from Mend.io. If you want to learn more about his company and his platform, go to securityweekly.com/mend, RSAC. And of course, for all the coverage, go to securityweekly.com/RSAC. Thanks again, Rami, for being on the show.
Thank you. This is great.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.